Life doesn't come with an instruction manual.
So we made one.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Maciek.
And this is the Solutions Manual Podcast, your guide to making the most of your life, health, career, and relationships.
Subscribe, leave a comment, and share. Let's dive into our next episode.
Welcome back to the Solutions Manual Podcast. We are joined by Vicky from Imagine How. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Vicky. I'm the founder of Imagine How, and we focus on shrinking what I like to call the 10% Quit Club. And that is 10% of menopausal people that are currently exiting the workplace due to unsupported or misunderstood menopause symptoms. So it's a case of imagine how great it will be when the next generation is through menopause. And then I have to find my next Imagine How, because that one will be ticked and nobody will be quitting and problem solved.
Ideally.
That's the dream.
Yeah. We met at the Health and Wellbeing at Work meeting earlier this year. And that's where our conversation started, because there was surprisingly not a lot of attention on menopause and this in the workplace. So I just found that so surprising, a little bit worrisome, especially considering the changes. So how was it the meeting for you?
It was really good, and I think a lot of people came by because they weren't aware of the changes brought about by the Employment Rights Act that was passed in December. And so we were at the show in March, and people weren't aware that there was a whole menopause element to the gender equality action plans that have been proposed, which come into force next year, but they're very much recommending that people start building them this year, because it's not just a case of recording your gender pay information on the government portal anymore. It's actually an action plan that needs to be looked at and measured year on year, so that they want you to propose progressions to it. And within that, one of the areas that you have to report on every year is how you're supporting menopause in the workplace. And so I think there was an element of panic, but we've got a mindset change where at the moment menopause is seen as a nice to have well-being initiative. If you've got the budget, we'll do something, but hey, it's only part of the workforce, so we haven't really got the budget, so we might not do anything apart from something in October when it's World Menopause Month. Well, now that shift has got to happen in C-suite's minds, that actually it's no longer a well-being initiative, it's a workforce risk. And the government recognised that. And so they've put it in with this. And so I think the awareness that this has now changed in where you put it is gradually getting out there. But I do think there's going to be a bit of a mad scurry around January next year where people will go, oh, it's not just a talk. We've really got to have a plan on how we're going to support this. And that's because they realized, the 10% Quit Club costs a lot of money. It costs the economy a fortune. And so I was surprised, and then just thought, okay, I'm probably going to have a very busy year, because this is something people are going to need support with. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it is surprising. But I would say we're still at that discovery phase where okay, do we, don't we? When do we need to do this by? What is it? So I've got another webinar where I'm talking about exactly what it is and where menopause fits into it. And that's been quite well received. So I think people are wading through the information, because it's not just this, it's the flexible working changes. There's so many that they're being hit with, and most companies will just place that in their HR department when actually this particular part of it needs senior leadership ownership. So it's going to need to be a lot more widely spoken about.
Okay, so that's interesting. So Vicky, let's maybe jump straight into the workplace. And what are the things that organizations can do or will have to do as well, taking into account the new legislation? And what I'm particularly interested in is how do you think, what are the risks as well of things going sideways. We've seen this, for example, in the mental wellness space, where the very interventions that the senior leaders got involved in, or later HR departments, actually bring the opposite results to what was intended, right? So a lot of workplace interventions, and we have data to back it up now, that were probably very well intended to support people with, let's say, mental wellness or mental health conditions, backfire. We know that apps don't work. We know that certain interventions make things worse. We know that certain hiring practices highlight the wrong behaviors or environments, which draws in the people that we later struggle to maintain, motivate, retain, and so on and so on. So a lot of things happened, but a lot of things in that space went wrong. Maybe because they were cheap, maybe because they were easy to sell, maybe because there was on the top of a hype, but they didn't really work. So what do we do, or what can organizations do to support something that is a real problem of half of the workforce, if not more?
I do think there's been some learning from some of the things that have gone wrong, but where I see the potential risk is that there's 5 areas around menopause that they're recommending support on. One is to train managers. Now, that's really broad, because you could train managers by getting them to do siloed online learning, where they click, get 70% pass and tick that box. 90% of our managers are trained. That was the metric we wanted to meet in this year's menopause action plan, part of the gender equality action plan. We've met it because that amount have done it. That shouldn't be the metric, the completion. It's about getting the metrics right. It should be about where were you at in terms of menopause support in your organization. So how did people being line managed by non-menopausal people feel about the levels of safety, understanding, reasonable adjustment as a baseline? Then the manager training comes in, and then there's a measurement. Has anything changed? And if the answer to that is no, then your training wasn't sufficient enough. It didn't do what it needed to do. And so this is where I see the danger. When I look at the information that's out there, it's fine if you know, one, how to create sticky training that works, 2, how to measure the impact of it, and then act in accordance if it hasn't quite done what you expected it to do. And so everything's there that the government want you to do something that's progressing and report on it, but deciding on the metrics might need to be the next step, where they need to step in next year and go, actually, this is what we want to know. You could pick a really easy metric, like, as I said, 90% have completed. It doesn't actually say, well, has that stopped anybody walking out the door? Has it impacted your sickness rates because your reasonable adjustments are so much better now? It's got the basis for being good, but I think if it's approached as a, let's get this done quickly and tick a box, it won't have the outcome that they want it to have. And so the way that it's been set up gives me hope, because they do want that progressing. They do want you to report on it, and you have got to do a narrative about what you've chosen to do and how you're going to report on it. So it's whether or not there's any comeback. We've looked at these and these aren't good enough, or the government tick a box and go, these have uploaded, and we know we've got 90% of organizations that now have trained managers. Well, if we haven't got the 10% quit club going down and the 70% higher sickness rates coming down, then so what would be my answer to that?
Exactly.
You know, it's just training for training's sake. So that's, I think for me, that's where, having been in education and creating qualifications and educational products for over 20 years, that's the bit for me where anything that I want to do with an organization, they have to buy into wanting to move the dial. If they come to me and say, we want to do some training, we want to tick a box, I'll point them in the direction of some free online training and say, go there, do that, because it's not going to meet my mission.
So the changes for the workplace under the Employment Rights Act. So what was it before and what is it now? And how is your work with Imagine How helping with that?
Okay. So previously, for menopause, the only kind of workplace, what I would say, protection from any kind of law would have been from the 2010 Equalities Act. And so menopause is listed under It's not a special characteristic. It's listed under sex, age, and if your symptoms are severe and long-term, I'm not sure what that means in terms of long-term, but if they are falling into the severe category and that has been acknowledged by a medical professional, then you are also protected under disability. So if an employer fails to make a reasonable adjustment, then and you end up losing your job, you could take them to tribunal. That's one of the biggest ones where cases have increased by about 219% in 2 years, is that companies don't realize that if a symptom is severe, that then that person is protected under the protected characteristic of disability. And if you don't make reasonable adjustments like you would for any other disability, then you can be taken to tribunal. And there's been quite a lot of successful cases with that. Now, to me, that's just like a really negative approach to it, because
The worst probably imaginable for women. Yeah.
The worst approach. And to even have it listed under that, like somebody said, oh, I'd like menopause to be a protected characteristic. And I said, I really wish we didn't have to have protected characteristics, because ultimately it's about being human, and it's about thinking about, well, how's it presenting? How can we help? And, if that's made easier for somebody, then you're going to get the best out of them, and there isn't a problem. So it comes back to that culture thing. And unfortunately that, it's the stick that tends to lead to action and change. So that's what we've always kind of had. But more recently, that's been prominent. And under the Employment Rights Act, we had like reporting on gender pay, and it was all about shrinking that gender pay gap. But now it's expanded out into the gender equality action plans. And so there is a lot more in it under menopause. There's 5 areas, and it's that managers need training. There need to be peer networks. You need policies and procedures that also link to workplace assessments, but not is your desk at the right height assessments for how menopause is impacting you. So do you need a different uniform made of a different material if you're in uniforms, that stuff. And then there's the whole reasonable adjustments. There's a whole section on that. And so that's the area I think that workplaces are struggling with, because they're like, well, we've got in our policy that we'd make a reasonable adjustment and we'd put a fan on the desk. And they're like, well, that'd be no use to me because I don't get hot flushes. So it's like, it comes back to that. Well, what conversation do you need, and what reasonable adjustments can be made to best cater for the symptoms that you're having? And so for me, it would have been a whole host of stuff. It would have been pulling on the occupational health elements and the employee assistance program, so that I could access a medical professional that I could speak to, because my doctor wasn't, the best. And then it would be talking to that person about what adjustments could be made, and then going back and having a trained manager that then could open up that conversation, as those conversations. So you could say, this is how it impacts me. On these particular days, I would like to have the option to say to you, I need to work from home today.
Right.
And that to be okay. And it to be quite short notice, because it might not be until that morning that symptom shows up, and then I need to work from home. And what would the contingency be if I did have a face-to-face meeting? How would we address that to get the best out of that? So it's just thinking about all the areas and what plan Bs you could have in place. And where that's happened in organizations, 9 times out of 10, plan B is never needed. It's just the fact that it's the support, it's there, and then it gives that person a sense of, I can still operate as me, and I'm still as skilled as I was before. I just need to make these tweaks, and my manager gets it. So that's not going to raise my stress levels. That's then not going to impact on any top up HRT I might be taking, because it's all just understood and we've got a plan and everybody agrees with it. And so it's everything that I'm talking about with workplaces is just comes from the root of basic human kindness, which is, depressing, really. We can't get there on our own. We
Sad
need
reality.
education and
Yeah, requires lawyers to,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know that. We know that that's the sad reality, but yeah, so I guess my biggest thing with Imagine How is I am giving people clarity on what all of these changes mean. But uh, if you work with me, we work to move the dial. It's about shrinking the 10% quit club. And so
yeah,
I would never, I haven't built any online training that people can do in silo and click through and get a 70% pass mark. And I never will, because it will not change the 10% quit club. But the
No.
training that I do is around getting a real solid understanding, getting some real stories in, and some real
Yeah.
what could we do? How could we adjust it? Actually getting people to think about the solutions for themselves, because they know their workplace the best. They know their colleagues the best. So if you just add a bit more information into that, as what's it like for me? How does it show up? What does that look like to you? By the end of about an hour, people have a much more human understanding of each other. And
Yep.
the reasonable adjustments just become easy.
Yeah. Obvious, probably
Yeah.
even. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's about that. It's about wanting to just change from a kind of quick fix, which isn't a fix. It's a quick tick, but the stats prove it with the tribunals, unfortunately, they're going up. To go up that much in 2 years, the last stats came out in 2024, so we're due to get some more. If it's gone down, I'd be shocked. So
Yeah.
you know, these are big companies. I think the latest one was Direct Line, and 65K that's payout for not making adjustments for somebody that ended up having to leave the workplace. And
Yeah.
you're like, you know, there was just no need for it. And
Yeah. And those are very simple things.
intervention, you know, it wouldn't even cost 10% of what they've paid out.
Right.
It wouldn't even
If
cost
not
that.
less.
So
Yeah.
it's like, this is happening, but in the mind, it's like, well, we haven't got budget to pay for this. But actually, you haven't got budget not to pay for this. This will increase your budget because you'll get a return.
And then you will have to implement it anyway.
Yeah, right.
Immediately, because if you don't,
yeah,
you're going to get another case against you raised in the same week. Yeah.
And the customers often come to me when they've had a bad experience, when something's happened. And I've got to say, 9 times out of 10, the intention was never to get to tribunal. It's just where it ended up, because nobody knew what to do about it. And it's like, if we talk about it, are we opening a can of worms that then everybody's going to go off and go, I need this, I need that. And it's not the case. It's, you know, the average person just feels a sense of relief when they actually get somebody go, okay, what can we do with that?
Yeah.
How about this? And then it's like, great. And then they turn up for work even more, you know, they're more present. It's like, this company gets me. Why would I want to go anywhere else? So I think we have quite a negative lens on trying to do anything to support in case it backfires on us, you know, rather than, well, it will anyway if you do nothing.
I think this is very important, Vicky, and I think this is partially what we would like to explore more. We know that organizations tend to go for the cheapest thing that meets the bare minimum compliance. Yes, we showed you an online video. Now your menopause is solved, right? That's how a lot of companies see that. So we know it doesn't work. There is hardly any knowledge transfers on its own works. It's rarely enough. If there's anyone interested listening to our podcast that runs or is a decision maker in an organization, what do we know really works when it comes to giving support to women going through menopause, and what doesn't?
Yeah. So we know that a lot of the stats around menopausal people, they just don't feel seen or heard, but also confident enough to start the conversation. So what works is when you approach it as menopause being an everybody conversation, and you look at that from the point of view of everybody will know somebody that is of menopausal age and may have severe symptoms, may not. So regardless of whether you're one of those people, it's good to know. because there'll be somebody in your life, regardless of whether it's at work or at home, that you will be able to support. So I think once that mindset of this is for everybody and it's not just for those going through it happens in an organization, then there's an openness to training or to workshops. And that then becomes the easy part, because if people are going thinking, I'm going to get something out of this because this is my role in making this easier, then there's an understanding of why they're there and what they're doing. And ultimately, the thing that makes the difference is just talking about how you can talk about it. Because people are worried, if I say this, would I offend the menopausal person? Or if you're menopausal, if I admit that I'm struggling with this, will it mean I'll get demoted over time because I'm no longer capable of my job? So it's really around psychological safety in organizations, but building out the conversations and then the really, really realistic adjustments. Because once you've got, as I like to term it, I call my menopause monkey, once you've got that tamed and you've got your formula, so maintaining the management of it, then it feels like you're back to yourself. So,
Right.
so it's actually twofold, I think. It's culture, so building out that culture that it is safe to talk about it. It's understanding how to talk about it so that it's not, oh, you're probably of that age, you're getting hot flushes now. No, no. So it's, how do I approach it? And then it's that self-advocacy as well, because it shouldn't just be about a manager asking the right questions. It should be about the person knowing where they can also go to manage their own menopause symptoms. So, and that's where the ongoing support works, because I've found it's like a labyrinth, once you get into it. I think we've spoken before about the connectivity of what's happening with the sex hormones during menopause that then impacts the stress hormones, that then impacts sleep, that then impacts your motivation to exercise. And it just becomes this spiral of, oh, it's just too hard. Whereas it's those tools to be able to move your sliders, I guess, and go, okay, so sleep seems to be the issue, but let's unpack why. And actually the issue isn't sleep. The issue is you're in constant fight or flight mode. And so you're not getting any sleep because you've got way too much cortisol keeping you alert and awake, and you're not getting decent sleep. So let's see what we can do with that. And why is that like that? Well, because your hormones are going up and down, because you're in perimenopause, and they're causing a reaction that switches the fight or flight on. So it can become really quite technical from that point of view. But from a workplace point of view, just about the starting and the signposting. And then most people going through this have probably got every book on the market on their shelf because they're trying to self-help. They're looking for answers. And so I think it's about showing them where to go, what is good information. Some big companies, they invest in menopause mentors that are a little bit like the mental health first aiders, but with a menopause mentor, it would be somebody that would know where to signpost you to everything you might need within that organization that's to do menopause. So that, and then you've got a kind of listening ear that you can talk to, tell your story to, and it's somebody that just gets it. Bigger companies are investing in that as well. So it's about seeing it as a long-term investment that gives you huge return, because this demographic, the fastest growing demographic to be entering the workplace, if they've had a time of being off where they may have brought children up and that had been their choice, that coming back feeling freer, but with menopause hitting,
Enter menopause.
feeling
Yeah.
confident. So it really is a kind of perfect storm that this demographic could be the demographic that boosts the economy if we can keep them in work and supported. And it actually, for what the investment is, for the return on it, it should be in every business strategy. It's not even a cost.
Yeah.
It's an investment, and that return, I'd say conservatively, you'd get £5 for every pound on menopause interventions. But for some companies, that could be a lot more. You know, the bigger the company, it doesn't mean that the cost of the intervention goes up. It might just mean you have to buy more of it if you've got more managers, that you need more training, but actually the baseline cost is the same. So they could be looking at £40 return on every pound spent. It's that much of a no-brainer, to be honest with you.
Right.
It baffles me that it's seen as a nice to have when actually it could solve a lot of problems. It isn't just me saying it. The research that's been looked at out there, that's why menopause features in the Gender Equality Action Plan, because they know if they can get it right, it will make a massive difference, and not just to the economy, but to the people's lives. And if that can be avoided, the cost to that company to replace somebody, and somebody senior as well, the cost goes up the more seniority, the more experience that they've got. So
Yeah, of course. It sounds like it's biology versus business.
Yes.
And now we're in a place, even prior to the Employment Rights Act, where there was much more evidence for what are the actual costs to the workplace, both in terms of financial or mental or physical. And now we have this bolus of data to lay it out very clearly, whereas the biology has always been the same.
Yeah.
But now there's maybe more awareness and more understanding of how to manage this normal biological function that happens.
Yeah.
But it still seems like it's this business mindset versus how to encompass it. And you mentioned that the cost is over £1 billion.
Yeah.
So where does that figure come from? Because if it must be more than just replacement or the interventions or the lost productivity. What does that encompass?
So the 1.5 billion in a report done by the NHS Confederation, that was more around the cost of actual sick days due to menopause.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just the absence, right?
Yeah, and so that was down to the absence. But when you look at the introduction of the Employment Rights Act and you look at the Gender Equality Action Plans that have been put in, they've actually sort of drilled down a bit more around employment of this age group and this demographic, and said that actually, if we could increase the amount of women across the age ranges in employment by 5%, then our gross domestic product would increase by 125 billion. So just by encouraging 5% more females into employment, that would have that effect, just 5%.
Wow.
And so that's why they've looked at recruitment, they've looked at diversity, and how transparent they've got to be about what they do about the gender pay gap or employing females. But this is why menopause has come in as number 5, because they can see that as a massive indicator as to, well, actually, if we get this right as well, that's actually going to help get towards that 125 billion increase in GDP. There's been a lot of number crunching done on this. The thing that I'm really passionate about emphasizing as well is that, yes, that's the business side, and we know that there's always got to be a business imperative for people to want to do it. But the human cost of it is it's just so much more than that. You know, from marriages breaking down because there's not an understanding of how it shows up and how extreme someone's symptoms can be, to people walking away from their jobs. And in my situation, I was the main earner. And so it just blows things up. You're like, well, what am I going to do now? And the plans that you thought you had, they're just gone. And I know this is typical of many different people in different walks of life, not just menopausal people, but I think it's the sheer volume that has got people sitting up going, actually, this is impacting too many people for this not to be put at the forefront.
With those possible interventions that employers could do to support
Yeah.
menopausal women at that transitional time. And it is an important time because, as you said, it comes at a prime time.
Yeah.
Kids are typically out of home or close to being out of home for the majority of women at that age. And that decline is rapid, right? Men's decline is much more gradual as they age. For women, it comes suddenly, as you have outlined. And it comes at the prime time in their life, right? When they actually are still productive, still capable, where the things that can be done or often are not done can mean, well, losing probably the most important or most critical decade of someone's life. We've seen it in the mental health support for a bit, when everything became a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the word you use, self-agency, which I
Yeah.
think is critical. Is there a risk that when this is outsourced to employers, it will actually take that self-agency away from women because they will expect the workplace or the manager to deal or take care of that? We've seen this in mental health space, and it's been devastating. It's now, again, proven, despite the well intentions in that space.
Yeah, potentially there is that. But one of the 5 areas in your menopause action plan that becomes part of the gender equality plan is around support hubs and peer networks. And so what they've done is they've recognized the importance of having those critical conversations with not just with people going through it, but with people that aren't, so that stories aren't lost. I was talking to somebody in the week, and they said that they had a menopause hub in their workplace. They didn't have a lot else, and we were talking about, well, what else could be plugged in to make it more well-rounded. But what she said is, she said that it was great being part of this hub because she had got on a program of hormone replacement therapy. And she said, because all of my life I've always taken tablets in the morning for anything, I just lined my HRT up and just took them in the morning. She said, I was feeling awful. I was feeling really tired and drained and thinking maybe this HRT isn't for me. She said, so I booked to go back to my doctor. She said, but I haven't really read any of the packets because in my head, take your tablets in the morning. She said, in this hub, it was just somebody else talking and saying, oh, I've just changed over and I've gone on to progesterone. I'm taking one every night before I go to bed because obviously some of the effects of it make you a little bit more drowsy. And she said, I was like, oh, that's why. She said, it's completely my fault for not reading the packet. She said, but being at work and having that hub and having that network of women that were going through all different types of, some might be on HRT, some might be trying different herbal remedies, albeit they may not have any kind of research behind them. But, there'll be all sorts of conversation going on there about, should you do this? Should you do that? And she said, it just opened my eyes up to, I should really read the packet. But also it was something simple that she was on the verge of, oh, maybe HRT isn't working. And she said that simple change made all the difference. So I think if you've got networks within organizations where you're still sharing, and I do say that with some caution, because they could end up being like snake oil kind of forums, where people are going, try this, take that. And whenever I talk to organizations about setting up a peer network, I say they must follow a limits framework. They need to know their limits. They're not to give advice. It's about, well, where do we get our information from? Challenge, is it reputable? If it's on Instagram and it's telling you your menopause belly is going to go in 5 days, the chances are it's not been backed
going to happen.
And depressingly, I mean, I wish they were. Or you've got a magnetic ring you're going to wear and that's going to solve all of your cortisol issues. It's like, look at the research. So it's about, when they build that peer network, they have some ground rules in there. And it's not for advising on lotions and potions. It's just about talking about things in a controlled kind of way. Often we share sort of stories about, I can't get my partner to understand. Someone else to say, well, what I did is I sat down and watched this with them. And afterwards they were like, oh, I didn't realize it was quite, oh, it all makes sense now. And so, you know, like just sharing different things that had worked with different family members. So although it's at work, it builds up quite a kind of camaraderie, I guess. The downside of those for me is that then it feels like, oh, you've got that, so that's enough. That's one element, that's one section of the puzzle. And so that on its own, I think would do more damage than good. But that with really good training, really good understanding, like how to manage a menopause monkey is what I do. And it talks about all of the different options that are open, but it pulls on looking at your sleep, looking at your nutrition, looking at your activity, looking at your community or connection so that you're not too isolated, and then looking at stress management. What can you do with those techniques? And so I think if you've got the community element in the hub, you could have different themes and then get different people in to talk about, well, how does menopause impact sleep? And then that will probably connect the dots to stress and connect the dots to exercise and connect the dots to nutrition, so that it's like, well, actually, none of this is happening in isolation. It's about keeping up the balance,
right.
all of those elements, rather than there's some HRT, job done, which is, I mean, with the background I've got in fitness, for me to think that HRT was the silver bullet, and then when I started to get anxiety and panic, to not join the dots and think it was hormonal. I look back at that and think, how did you not see it? But it was because I was just so convinced the HRT made such a difference so quickly that I was like, that is that box ticked. That's no longer going to bother me. So it's making people aware that actually it's a constant balance of looking at the things and how regulated they are, I guess, for you. And
yes, Vicky, I need to say something important here, because for our listeners as well, we're not going to go into this in detail because we've done a separate podcast with a doctor specializing in menopause and menopause treatments. So we're going to link this to listeners if they want to. But you are highly educated in that space, and you know a lot about the connections between different systems with sleep, nutrition, and how those things impact each other, performance at work, and all the related issues, and the availability of HRT, and what a difference it makes, and how you cannot out-supplement your biology or hormonal changes. You know that apps, snake oils, magic rings, none of that bullshit works.
No.
But a lot of people don't.
No.
And I think that a lot of people don't know how to speak to their doctors, what to ask for. And we also know that a lot of doctors on the NHS don't know either. We've seen women coming with menopause symptoms and being prescribed mental health drugs. They've been prescribed anxiolytics. They've been prescribed diazepines for sleep. But those things will just continue doing damage. And that comes from women aware of the problems and going to seek the help from doctors. So I would urge everyone to, again, follow up and listen to the episodes that we have as well, especially if that has been the case for you, because we know this is a big problem. We also know that not just the lack of training sometimes to physicians on the NHS, it's also the availability of certain treatments. Testosterone for women, it's hardly available. Many of the working bits, like evidence-based effective treatments for HRT, are not available unless they're prescribed privately. There's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, not just in a workplace, but also throughout the healthcare system. Because this country at the moment, and I'm saying this knowing what the storm might come out of this, is just not ready to support that. And all of what we're talking about, that's implemented in many countries already for years, right? We're just slowly catching up between what's normal. And it will probably take some time. So that awareness helps, because if you know how to have a conversation with physician, how to have a conversation at work, it helps. So, okay, so that's an important thing. But I also need to ask a question, because there's a lot of things that women need to know about menopause. What men need to know about menopause?
Okay. I think my one thing that I always say to any man I speak to about this subject is, if you can just sit back and say to yourself that whatever's happening is not personal to you, you'll cope with it a lot better. I think what happens is that it comes on over time, and there's subtle changes, and then it may be irritability, it may be the lack of finding your partner attractive anymore because your testosterone levels have killed your libido. It could be a whole host of things, but often when I start talking to men about it, they're very sort of like, well, this is not, it's not my fault. This, and I said, you're taking it personally. You need to come back and go, this behavior is not directed at you because you've done something wrong. It's just coming out because there's nowhere else for it to go. And there's, at the moment, a bit of a struggle in understanding, well, how can I manage this? And because you're the person that they know the best and that they can be themselves with, you get the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so then it feels personal. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that men have said to me. That was almost like a light bulb moment, that it switched the framing, so that then when they were with their partner and something happened, if they took away the personal lens, it then became like, oh, what can I do to support? And what can we look at? And so I think that is the biggest thing. It's understanding that it's something that's happening to the person that they love, and that person is terrified because they don't recognize themselves. So why would that person recognize them when they're like, well, I'm not me anymore. This doesn't feel like me. And so I think that's the key to it. I'd also say get educated around it, because you don't have to really do much or say much. I think having some education around it just takes the pressure off, because it's like, this isn't, we know this isn't you, the real you. This is just something that's impacting the way that you're feeling and the way that you're behaving. And so what helps, what works to get you back to feeling on an even keel again? And it's like working those things through. But I think what often happens is just life gets in the way, and then it becomes a series of irritability, you don't understand, arguments, and then the gradual drift. Like, well, if I just stay away, I won't get on their nerves. But obviously, if you just stay away, then you just end up staying away. And that's where you get, I mean, this stat was produced by a law firm, so I'm not sure how much I trust it, but they said there's 77% of divorces women cite that a lack of understanding around what they were going through in the menopause was a contributing factor to the beginning of the end, if you like. It's about the gradual moving apart because you're not understanding each other, rather than not taking it personally and thinking, right, what could I do to support? Those kind of things are really easy. Love or hate Davina McCall, I think she's done wonders in the awareness around menopause, and the documentary that she did is quite hard hitting. And I think it's quite a good one to sit and watch with family, friends, because it gives a whole spectrum. And it's like, oh, I never knew it could show up like that. Most people think you just get hot and you just need a bit of a fan. Whereas actually the psychological symptoms, the loss of self, the loss of confidence, the panic, the anxiety, they're things that you don't expect to turn up, that are lesser known. And so then the behavior that somebody displays when they're feeling those things would be quite difficult for somebody to cope with if you suddenly became super sensitive, very anxious, crying at the drop of a hat. You think, oh, what have I done? You've done nothing. So it's that lens, that the reframe, that I think is really important for men.
I think it's important for women too, because I mean this might change now, but like the first conversation I had about menopause was in 4th grade, and the second one was 2 years ago. So that's a very big gap between, besides just wait, it gets worse. I think it would be very beneficial. A lot of women might recognize that and try to push through it or hide it or not really understand it while trying to work, while trying to be in the prime, or misinterpret a symptom as something completely different. So I think just having this early on and making it maybe a little bit more normalized, and these menopause hubs or part of your wellness offering, because there's employee assistance for all aspects of
Mhm.
your life outside of your workplace, should be available and encouraged to use. Maybe sometimes employers incentivize the use of those benefits
Yeah,
too, for everybody for a
yeah,
reason. I hope that maybe not just because it's now preventive or reactive to what the government changes, or that
yeah,
there's this amount of money, or just because why wouldn't you
yeah,
know about this in
Mhm.
general? I mean, it
yeah,
sounds like maybe that's
yeah,
there's a place for menopause at the water cooler, and then there's a place
yeah.
for menopause elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I said partly it's why the old menopause monkey came into creation, because it is. I know, like, everybody laughs, but it really is. It's that it's not you. It's just symptoms. And so,
Yeah.
when you make it something else, it's almost like, okay, so how do I now get back to feeling like me? Well, these are the things, these are the snacks you got to throw at the monkey. So it might be you're not sleeping, analyze what you're doing with that. There's enough people can do books on sleep and menopause that are reputable that they could read and they could go, okay, I can put some of these things into play.
Yeah.
But with clients that I work with, it literally is a case of you'll constantly be building your toolkit for what works for you. And so there's just set rules. You just avoid the snake oil salespeople. And so,
Yeah.
how do you avoid them? Well, anything that's making a claim, go back and look if there's any research attached to it. And if there is, what does it look like? Was
Mhm.
it just all completely funded by that company?
Yeah.
And all of that. So just look on a really basic level. Has it got anything back in it? You may have a friend that goes, I take this and I feel so much better. And it's like, that's great. It could be a placebo effect,
Yeah.
but also it doesn't mean that it does work. That's for you. You need to make an informed choice. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think there's a level of desperation of people wanting to feel like themselves again. And so they'll try anything. Like, I've done various things where I've done, all right, I'm going to try all this product just to see. And it's like, I have to say, it's not made one bit of difference, and
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
look at it really realistically and just think, hang on a minute,
Mhm.
have a read, think about the science behind this. Why would that
Yeah.
make any difference? And it's people reading more, educating themselves more, but knowing where to look for the right source.
Yeah. But
And
that's a
then
skill. That's a skill on its own, right? I mean,
it is a skill.
I'm research trained my entire life. I mean, it's difficult sometimes to read and appraise evidence
Yeah.
appropriately. So, it's not an easy thing to do.
No,
And not everyone can or even would be able to, even
no.
if they wanted to. A lot of
Yeah.
research is just not available without paying a
Yeah.
large amount of money to read one piece of evidence. What if you need 100? And
Yeah,
when you're going to
exactly.
have time to go through it? I think it's fair to say that most of the things that people promise you will quickly fix your problems with little effort probably don't work.
Mm.
I think another thing that is important for people to understand, if they're listening to us, is that the interventions that are effective, that are truly effective,
Mm.
take some time and effort. But
Yes.
what is often happening, and again, sometimes this is perpetuated by the healthcare community as well, is that we recognize one or two symptoms
Mhm.
and we go and seek help to manage the symptoms, not the underlying problem. I think we talked about this, flagged this before. If you're taking sleeping pills, which do not allow you to have a healthy restorative
Yeah.
sleep of appropriate architecture, because drugs do not allow you to sleep properly, that only fuels the metabolic, cognitive, and other problems downstream because you're still not sleeping. It seems like you do, but you
Yeah.
don't.
No.
While what should have been treated or addressed is the hormonal changes as you're going through menopause, because that will help. Yeah, so
Mhm.
the cause might be different to what is being
Yeah.
treated. And I think that's important to bring awareness to
Yeah.
that as well.
I think the message that you're giving there is definitely, you know, that anything that will have a positive impact is not likely to happen overnight. So
Yeah.
There's been lots of research around the importance of strength training as you age so that you can stay mobile, that you can stay doing things for activities of daily life and all of those things. But the reality of it is that motivating yourself to do that strength work 3 times a week, there may be something else underlying that's impacting your motivation or your energy that makes that much harder to then do it. So that's why I always like to look at the interplay of everything around, like activity is one thing, but the biggest barrier to activity is time or motivation. I know I've got to do it, but I just don't feel like it. And when I'm there, everything hurts. So, like with menopause, if you've got a lot of inflammation around joints or connective tissue and you're struggling with that aspect, and as you've said, Matt, that you can't get Androfem on the NHS at the moment, you'd have to pay for a clinic. And then for me, is finding a clinic that you can trust, that is going to have FDA approved, something that is going to work for you. So a lot of the battle is that knowing where your levels of hormone are at and actually what you can get versus your actual natural levels of motivation on that given day. And so, to get up and do strength training 3 times a week, that might be the recommendation for a menopausal person. But I can tell you, I find that extremely difficult. I'm managing twice a week.
That's why we don't like motivating people. It's a feeling. It doesn't last, and you cannot rely on a feeling for consistency at all. Like we teach completely different things in order to be able to sustain that.
Yeah.
And what you just said about resistance training, that's the critical decade. That it needs to happen. It's also the most difficult to do an additional thing, especially if you haven't built those habits before.
I think it's worth highlighting what you said too, Vicky, that topping up with hormone, because you may or may not need that, which requires medical testing and understanding, is not and you said this earlier, is not the silver bullet. It's not going to suddenly make you want to go to the gym. If there's underlying emotions around doing behaviors that are healthy, but you're not doing them, whether it's sleep, eat, move, that's a different thing. And that probably existed well before menopause.
Yes.
And it's just that there's awareness, maybe a more physical awareness because your body changes, that brings that awareness to the forefront, that makes it harder for you to sleep, eat, move, work. So I think what you said about it's just going to bring you back to where you would normally be. And then you kind of can manage that so that you can manage why is it that you are not prioritizing that in a certain way. I also think that when you give it to the men, just big picture this and step back, I think that's helpful for anyone as well. But I think that's so important to just clarify that you're just topping up if you need it.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. Personally, I feel better topping up my estradiol and my progesterone, but I would like a more scientific way of making sure I was putting the right amount top up on each day, because I know for a fact, just by how varied it is, some days it's not right. So it's like, it feels like you're trying to do your best with it. But as you said, Matt, there's so much training that needs to happen. And it within, for GPs and in the medical world around this, that at the moment, that's why my hope is that by the time my daughters get to this age, that there literally will be a way that you can work out where you're at each day and you'll know what up to give yourself to maximize that. And I'm sure we're not far away from that, and it probably does exist, but it would mean that it would cost a fortune, and it's not something that the average person can access.
But we also have this tendency, I think, sometimes to wait until problems happen, right? And Sarah, you just mentioned that, yes, you become suddenly aware of certain problems, and then you try to do something extra when it's becoming difficult because certain habits haven't been built. But there's plenty of evidence and systematic review and meta-analytic evidence that shows that women who enter menopause with higher muscle mass, better metabolic health, who regularly do resistance exercise, that follow healthy, nutrition dense dietary patterns broadly, benefit from much lower severity of symptoms. They go through menopause still, but it's at far reduced level of symptoms. The mood is better, they sleep better, the bone density loss is less, and they already have habits that help support that healthy living. So that conversation shouldn't be happening at the point when there already is a problem. That
No.
conversation should be happening earlier. And when we talk about the interventions that have high return of investments, that starts earlier. And I know it's difficult to convince people to do that when everything seems to be fine. And by the way, that is true for men as well. For men, those hormonal changes as they are aging happen just as much. They're just much more gradual. But they will happen and they will affect them too. It's just less, they barely notice this happening because it's just stretched over 2-3 decades rather than a couple of months when it hits. But the self-care, that starts early, ideally, and it shouldn't be an additional burden. It just should be a continuation as you go through menopause. And there is no education on that at all as well, right? That's something every schoolgirl should know. This is something I want my 13-year-old daughter to know. That yes, when you leave school, make sure you stay active, build those habits, continue doing it, because this will make a big difference further down the line. You can't avoid menopause, but you can cushion it while reaping other benefits of living healthy lifestyle anyway. Like there are other benefits, not just for menopause.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, I have maintained activity levels and looked after my nutrition, and I would say there are certain symptoms that haven't bothered me during menopause. I wonder if there's any studies around longevity studies around women that track their hormonal response at different points in their life, because interestingly for me, when I had my children, the symptoms that have been the severest in menopause were the symptoms that were severest post this pregnancy. So the only time I've ever felt that in my life is after having both of my daughters and then in menopause. I don't really remember puberty. I do remember rage as one of the things, but other than that, it's probably a bit too long ago. But I do distinctly remember the anxiety and the panic after having children and then in menopause. And the reason I think that's so distinctive is because that's something that any other time in my life has never, ever bothered me or crept in. So it's felt really unmanageable because it's not something I've ever had to deal with or throughout life. So it would be interesting to see if there's any correlation between periods of your life where your hormones change rapidly. Are there significant symptoms that are typical to you that may then show? So if there is that, because of seeing that after having children, it may have given me a heads up that this could show up like this during a period of hormone flux, and this is how it may present for you. That may have given me a much easier ride in terms of seeing it and dealing with it, because as soon as it was acknowledged and realized, it's become much easier to manage. That's my hope with technology, that we can get to a point where you can work out what's right for you, because I think that's the biggest problem. It's not like you can go, okay, here is the menopause solution. When you think it,
there's no such thing.
Yes, and you do this and you do that. Impossible, because everybody's different. And then over those years, the symptoms change because the hormones change. So it's that deeper understanding of the interplay of the hormones that I think, from my point of view in the UK medical kind of sector, that needs to be much, much, much bigger in all of the training.
Yeah.
All of the training that goes on, because not just for menopause, hormones, for absolutely everything, for mental health, for anything that you've got going on. I mean, the things around Parkinson's, when you look at the diversity of the endocrine system and what's going on with that, I just think it's fascinating that it's not given enough emphasis, because it could save so much more money elsewhere with things.
Yeah.
Said we're given a tablet to try and correct it, but actually you're not working out what the underlying root cause is.
No.
And a lot
No,
of
that's very 1960s type of thinking,
yes,
unfortunately, that the NHS is stuck with.
yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
Especially something that affects a majority of the population too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like you said, no brainer.
yeah.
We have a very different tradition here on the
Oh.
Solutions Manual podcast, where the previous guest gets to ask the next guest a question. It could be random, you don't know who it will be or what the topic will be, and then you will get to ask our next guest a question
Okay.
of your own. So we'll start with the question from the previous
Okay.
guest. Ready?
Yeah.
Is there consciousness in an AI?
Oh. That's a really interesting question, because I want to say no, but I have to say yes.
Oh, interesting
Yeah.
answer. Mm.
And I think,
Mm.
yeah, it's really tricky, because I don't know, maybe it's pseudo consciousness, maybe it's the illusion of consciousness more so than consciousness, because to have consciousness, surely you've got to have unconsciousness.
Mm.
So yeah, I've tied myself in knots. Who asked that? I'm going to go back with my first answer. I'm going to say no.
Interesting.
I am, even though I could convince myself to say yes.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Mm,
Okay, so Vicky, without knowing who our next guest is,
yeah,
what is the question you would like to ask them?
it's got to be something menopause related. It has to be. So, yeah, the question is, can they name 10 symptoms of menopause?
That's great.
Yeah, can they name 10 symptoms of menopause? Yeah.
Okay.
And if you like, I can give you like 30 and you can check. Go, sorry, You'll know anyway, won't you, Matt? You'll know all of these anyway. So
Yes, but our listeners will not. How about we do a rapid fire? Can you just go straight from the top of your head
yeah,
what comes in? Because I think that every person listening to it, it is very important to understand that if you see those things, and sometimes it's just one or two,
yeah,
and you are in the age bracket
yeah,
where it might happen, recognizing them as not diseases on its own, but
no,
as part of something else is very, very important. So, Vicky, rapid fire then.
okay.
Start
Rapid
listing.
fire. I'd say the biggest one is when somebody just doesn't feel like themselves. That's the switch on, what's
Mhm.
going on.
Mhm.
And then individual symptoms, anything like you might get joint pain. So it could be, there's a lot of reports of frozen shoulder, and you may never have had problems with your shoulder. Hair and skin changes, changes to sleep, changes to level of energy. Now, these could be anything, but it's about how they present collectively. If you just don't feel like yourself, start writing down how you're feeling and what's hurting, what's not hurting. And what you'll do is you'll get a big bank of symptoms. I haven't mentioned hot flushes because it is a symptom, but it doesn't feature in the top 10 of any kind of survey that have been
Yep.
done more recently. So more around the brain fog, the anxiety, the panic attacks, all of those things seem to be the lesser known and seem to then be attributed to something that might not be menopause. So that's just a handful. There's lots: weight gain, tinnitus, another really interesting one. So you know, when we start to look at that there's receptors all over the body and those hormones are dropping, it makes sense that it would show up in things like tinnitus. And when you get your top up, if you get your top up, if you
Yeah.
like HRT, it can make those symptoms lesser or completely go away. But it's not to say that once they're gone, they won't come back. That's the other thing. So if you don't feel like
Yes.
yourself, track how you're feeling, write it down, and
Yeah.
then have a look at typical symptoms and
Yeah.
go, is there a correlation? And then don't think you've just mastered it. Keep an eye on the changes, because your symptoms might change over time.
And I think it's important to know that a lot of them get treated. Unnecessarily, something else gets treated rather than the problem.
Yes.
Higher blood pressure
Yeah.
can be the only symptom of early menopause that it's often ignored.
Mhm.
You've mentioned headaches or exacerbation of migraines. Very, very common, very, very often ignored.
Yeah.
You mentioned tinnitus as well, dizziness. That happens quite a
Yeah.
lot. And everything that is to do, you mentioned skin, but dry eyes, vaginal dryness,
Yeah.
dry mouth, right? That can be a symptom. People look for treatments outside of the underlying cause. Yeah.
I was told I had high cholesterol and offered
Yeah.
statins.
High cholesterol.
And
Classic.
it wasn't. It was just to do with the fact that because the hormones were surging, it spiked my
Yes.
adrenaline, and then 6 months later or a year later, I had another blood test, and it was completely back to normal because I'd started the HRT. And so
Yes, but you knew what to treat. A lot of women will be prescribed, oh, now you need to completely revamp and change your diet. Not necessarily. Now you're going to be put on statins. Right. And they're not going to solve the problem. It's just will continue to get worse and worse and worse. We talk about mood, irritability, anxiety, of course, but there's much more subtle ones. Brain fog is frequently reported, or difficulty concentrating. That's it. That might be all there is, and you start blaming yourself. What's happening? You became more forgetful.
And ordering your thoughts as well. I used to be able to run multiple projects on project boards.
Yeah.
And I'd look at the project boards, and it was like they were written in a foreign language. There was just there was no way for me to control those at all.
Yeah.
It was just, and at that point you just think, well, if I can't do that, I can't work. What do I do? That's talking to a doctor, tracking my symptoms, and then topping up those hormones.
Yeah. Sometimes it's all it takes.
Cleared that. I often describe it as it turned into like a spaghetti bowl where I couldn't see the beginning or the end of anything. And so just had no logistical ability.
Yeah.
An inability to, and that's not something that you can just label, really. It's like a sense of what's going on. It's like, why can't have I got something wrong with my brain? Have I got a neurological problem?
Right.
And a lot of women get treatments, or they seek self-help. What I'm going to do, I'm going to seek supplements. There's another app that's supposed to help me. None of that will work. There is no way. Waking up early, that's one of the early symptoms as well, that you just don't continue sleeping into that cutting out the last 90 minutes of sleep. We talked about this recently, have dramatic consequences downstream later that will need to be corrected. But if you'll be put on drugs to manage this, it's not going to help.
No.
A lot of those symptoms get completely unrecognized as part of something else that is relatively easily correctable with restoring more physiological levels of what is now not available. And I think, so hopefully people who listen to this will learn to recognize those
we've
things.
still got 1 in 3 being put on antidepressants when they
That's mind-blowing.
That is. And for that to still be a stat is,
and these drugs
scary.
are often impossible to discontinue. And those drugs on their own can be permanently damaging to otherwise healthy brains. Suffering or experiencing symptoms of lack of sexual or reproductive hormones. And safe top-up, as you've mentioned, virtually takes away majority of the problems without the ongoing narrative, worsening symptoms, and so on and so on. So, that's super important to be aware of.
Well, we'll pose it to the next guest, and we'll link you up, and you can.
Okay.
We need to invite someone who doesn't listen. Who doesn't listen to us.
Okay. Perfect.
Vicky, where can people find you?
I've got a website. It's www.imaginehow.co.uk, or on LinkedIn if they connect with me. I am very vocal on LinkedIn. I do lots and lots of posts. I do various articles from sharing what works for me, and I'm very clear that it's not research based. And if there is research that backs up things that works for me, I tend to say that there is and cite that, and I would have had a look at that. I do various things. I talk about my journey so that anybody that's on there that looks at it thinks, oh, I'm not on my own. Actually, I thought I'd lost my job. I'd left my job and I was on my own. So it helps normalize that this is, the 10% quit club is a real thing, and you shouldn't be embarrassed to be a member, but come and help me shut it down is the kind of the voice there. And then from a workplace point of view, I'm very aware of not beating anybody with a stick. It's about, look, this is the business case. It's not a wellbeing initiative. It's a people risk. And the reason you can't see it is because you don't know the size of your menopause demographic. So if you knew you had 100 people in a menopause demographic and you were doing nothing, then the chances are 10 of those will leave at an average cost of 30,000 each, £300,000 out of your leaky bucket. But you're not seeing that 300,000 go because you're not recognizing that demographic.
Yeah, and that's average, right?
That's average.
That is
average.
That's now, if this is an executive role, that is 20, 100 times more sometimes, depending how senior. And for women at the menopausal age, let's say above 40, they are likely to already be in more senior than junior roles. So that's, again, something to keep in mind as well.
I mean, that 300,000, probably closer to $1 million, $1.5 million.
Easily, yes.
The different roles. So when I left, I think that would have cost them close to 200,000 to replace. But it's invisible. And that's the reason nothing's happening about it. It's a risk that's just not seen. And so that's the biggest piece of my kind of LinkedIn posting at the moment, is around the unseen risk. It's hiding in plain sight. So that's the two angles. The one is straight at the person that's going through it, building a normality around, this is what the current situation is, but this is how you can work together to change it. And then the other one around, you're just not seeing what's there, what's costing you. Every company will be like, we just don't have the budget for it. Well, if you sort out your menopause demographic, you'd have quite a bit more budget that you could play around with, because it wouldn't be leaking out. That's where I can be found. LinkedIn, I am very vocal. It's me, Vicky, but also Imagine House on LinkedIn as well.
Well, Vicky, thank you so much for joining us today. This is such an important conversation, and imagine how it might be in the future.
Exactly, yeah. I think it's very nice when you find like-minded people that look holistically at things rather than isolation. And I just find it so odd that anybody would look at anything in isolation, but then we get 10 minutes with a GP and we can only talk about one thing. Well, if I've got 5 things going on, how do you know they're not connected if I don't talk to you about all 5? What's that about?
Well, one of the reasons I decided not to work for NHS anymore, when a patient came in and the lady had a car accident, she was trying to walk the dog and she was run into by someone who actually had a heart attack. So nobody's really at fault. And she wasn't really that badly injured, but 2 or 3 days later, she started having symptoms. She had like a tiny fracture in her wrist. She had an issue with her shoulder and with a hip. So she called the reception. She got 3 separate appointments on 3 separate days for being run over by a car. I mean, that's telling.
It's just, it's mind-blowing. You have to book your appointment and think, what could I say it is that connects all of these things? And then just go in and go, right, I think I've got this, and it's this, and this. Oh, you should have had 5 appointments. Oh, well, I'm here now.
Oh, geez. Wow.
Yeah, it's important to know where to find the right help. We link our guests so it's clear that where they can find you if they need your support as well.
Lovely. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll see you soon.